Good evening. What's unfolding at this moment across the Western Hemisphere represents everything American defense planners have labored for 200 years to prevent. This is the precise situation military strategists hoped would remain impossible after the Cuban Missile Standoff. Yet here we stand. Moscow has installed advanced strike capabilities on Venezuelan territory, mobile, hidden, defended by Russian-trained personnel, and capable of hitting targets deep within the continental United States. The instant American intelligence verified what these platforms were, where they sat, and who controlled them, Washington shifted into maximum readiness without hesitation. This emergency didn't start with announcements. It didn't start with declarations. It started quietly, the way these situations always unfold in reality. An orbital pass, a transport column detected moving, a thermal reading that didn't align with anything Venezuela should possess, a configuration in the shadows of a military installation that analysts in Virginia and Colorado instantly identified as something they prayed they'd never encounter in this hemisphere. And when they enhanced the resolution, the entire picture transformed. Initially, American analysts identified the silhouettes of transporter erector launchers, specialized vehicles designed specifically to haul and launch ballistic or cruise missiles. At that instant, the alerts within the intelligence apparatus jumped from routine observation to genuine worry. But when the follow-up pass showed radar structures configured in the precise architecture of Russian mobile long-range guidance networks, worry escalated to full emergency status. Then the definitive evidence landed. A Russian Il-76 military cargo plane touching down in Caracas, unloading hardware wrapped in heat-resistant covers, protected by Venezuelan personnel wearing Russian-patterned tactical equipment. That sealed it. No more questions, no more ambiguity. Moscow had positioned strategic strike platforms into the Western Hemisphere. And if you examine this through the framework of classical realism, my analytical lens, this action demonstrates flawless strategic reasoning. Great powers operate according to threat perception, force projection, and territorial imperatives. The Russians have observed NATO infrastructure advance consistently closer to their frontier. They've observed Western armaments strike progressively deeper into Russian-held zones. They've observed American officials discuss openly about diminishing Russian strength, and they've reached a fundamental determination. If they fail to generate equivalent pressure in America's sphere, Washington will persist in extending its military reach into Russia's. This is great power logic, not moral, not sentimental, but calculated. The placement of Russian strike systems in Venezuela isn't symbolic, it's a statement. And it's a statement designed to remind Washington of something it has overlooked. America is not exempt from strategic pressure. It is not unreachable. It is not protected by oceanic barriers. If Moscow can position strike systems in Venezuela once, it can replicate the action. It can broaden presence. It can strengthen installations. It can establish enduring operations in the hemisphere Washington once regarded as exclusively its domain. Inside the Pentagon, the reaction was swift and discreet. Air Force installations transitioned to elevated alert status without public disclosure. American naval assets modified their deployment patterns. Strategic monitoring networks recalibrated coverage over the Caribbean. Intelligence coordination with Colombia and Brazil intensified dramatically. This wasn't routine geopolitical maneuvering. It was violation of the absolute bedrock of American grand strategy. Because understand this clearly, the Monroe Doctrine is not historical relic. It remains the cornerstone of American security architecture. It declares explicitly and unambiguously that no external military entity can install offensive capabilities in the Western Hemisphere without triggering direct American response. Moscow just breached that principle. And they didn't breach it softly, they breached it with platforms that in escalated scenarios could engage American naval installations, critical infrastructure and population centers within minutes. We're not discussing symbolic deployments, advisory personnel, or harmless cooperation. We're discussing the identical systems Russia deploys in Ukraine to destroy hardened installations. That is what sits in Venezuela right now. Now let's examine the Kremlin's reasoning for a moment, because grasping their perspective is essential. Russia perceives itself as acting defensively. Yes, defensively, because in great power calculations, your defensive action always appears aggressive to your opponent. Russia perceives America as encroaching on its borders for decades. The eastern expansion of NATO, American defense installations in Poland and Romania, weapons shipments to Ukraine, intelligence assistance shaping battlefield results. From Moscow's vantage point, America has already surrounded Russian territory. So what does Moscow do? It selects the one pressure mechanism that forces Washington to reconsider. It brings the strategic competition close to American coastlines. From Russia's perspective, this isn't about threatening America. It's about controlling escalation dynamics. It's about deterrent signaling. It's about communicating: if you persist in tightening pressure on our frontiers, we will tighten pressure on yours. Now consider Venezuela. Why is Moscow using this nation as its platform? Because Venezuela is perfect for Moscow's purposes. It's diplomatically isolated, economically dependent, strategically positioned, and profoundly hostile to Washington. The Maduro government views Russian strike systems as protection, a guarantee that America cannot attempt leadership change without massive repercussions. This means the strike systems accomplish two objectives simultaneously. They advance Russian interests, and they secure Maduro's political survival. And that combination is what makes their removal extraordinarily difficult. Now examine the geography. Venezuela's northern coast faces the Caribbean, a region where American surveillance is not as airtight as Americans prefer to believe. The inland territory is filled with mountainous zones, jungle cover, and limited visibility valleys. Perfect concealment for mobile launch platforms and guidance equipment. Moscow is exploiting geography precisely as effectively as America uses Eastern Europe, and that transforms this from simple deployment. This establishes it as strategic foothold. Now let's address Washington's concern, because it's absolutely real. America cannot tolerate Russian strike systems in Venezuela. Not morally, but strategically. American military power is built on the assumption that its homeland remains safe from external missile threats. That assumption permits America to project force globally because it doesn't need to concentrate assets defending its own soil. Moscow is attempting to change that calculation. Even the possibility that Russia might eventually station long-range platforms in Venezuela creates strategic uncertainty, and uncertainty is catastrophic for American military planners. When warning intervals shrink from minutes to seconds, everything becomes more fragile. Every sensor anomaly appears more threatening. Every unidentified Caribbean launch becomes a crisis moment. Every ambiguous satellite reading becomes a potential route to catastrophe. This is how nuclear escalation becomes possible. Not because anyone designs it, but because both sides begin to fear that the opponent's next action might be devastating. And here is the most critical reality. Moscow doesn't need to launch a single weapon to gain strategic advantage. All it needs to accomplish is leave the systems there. Their presence forces America to operate differently, more cautiously, more nervously, more reactively. Exactly what Moscow desires. This is strategic pressure competition. And in this sequence, Russia just positioned a queen deep within America's side of the board. Washington now faces a predicament with no clean answers. Economic pressure won't remove these platforms. Negotiation won't persuade Maduro to expel Russian presence. Military action could eliminate Russian personnel and trigger broader conflict. And ignoring the systems is impossible. They fundamentally transform American strategic calculations. Every option involves risk. Every option involves escalation potential. Every option pushes America closer to direct confrontation. This is how great power emergencies develop, not with weapons firing, but with weapons arriving. America is now on maximum alert because it grasps this reality. Russia is not simply testing American determination, it is reconstructing American vulnerability. It is establishing a counter-pressure mechanism that forces Washington to reconsider every time it projects power internationally. Two great powers, both convinced they are operating defensively, both convinced the opponent is overreaching, both convinced that backing down equals strategic defeat. This is the most dangerous configuration in international politics. This is the landscape of miscalculation. This is the environment in which historical trajectories shift. And today it shifted in Venezuela. Stay alert, because this emergency is far from over, and it is only beginning.